Okay, good morning, everyone. Really nice to see so many people and lots of new faces again at this year's conference. It's always nice to invite new people as well as some old faces. And we did, each year we try and sort of pick a theme. We don't force it, but as we were starting to put the presentations together for this year, there did seem to be a natural theme coming out, and that was this word collaboration. So what's in a word? And we're going to be exploring that as a loose theme throughout the day. Now, when it comes to sort of thinking about, well, what is collaboration? I did what everyone does. I Googled it. And that's the first attempt, isn't it, to see, well, what does it mean? And the first definition that came up on Google was this one, which I thought was a little bit uninspiring. So the first thing it said was the action of working with someone to produce something. Well, okay, I guess factually that's correct, but not really quite what we might think as the sort of enlightening, engaging aspects of collaboration. So I then looked at the second definition thinking, well, always the second one is the right one. And the second one was a bit surprising. I never thought of this around collaboration. And it's the traitorous cooperation with an enemy. So thank you for coming. Hope you enjoyed today's conference. So that really isn't what we want to be sort of inspiring today, but it is interesting, isn't it? How I wouldn't have even thought of that, but that is a definition of collaboration. And even the lawyers won't be promoting that is what we should be looking to do. The third one was a little bit more maybe in keeping with what we should be thinking about. And it says a working practice whereby individuals work together to a common purpose to achieve business benefit. Collaboration enables individuals to work together to achieve a defined and common purpose. So maybe that's more akin to what we might be thinking of in terms of collaboration. Now, I'm not in a habit of arguing with a lawyer, but I have to disagree with my learned colleague when he said the word collaboration does not appear in the contract, because that is an incorrect statement. Where does collaboration appear within the contract, anyone? X12. Now, it almost doesn't appear. So you are there. Right. It's it only appears in X12. So as Matthew's already alluded to, it doesn't actually, it's not a common word in the contract. And if you take out X12, it does not appear. And in my experience, X12 is fairly rarely used. Raise your hand if you're aware, let's say in the last 3 years, you've had a contract where X12 has been used. Okay, not for the first time. You're on your own, John. But there was a couple of hands, actually. But it's rare, isn't it? So it is there, but it's not a very commonly used option. And obviously, it's got a new name with NEC4. It's now called multi-party collaboration rather than partnering. So again, it's trying to promote that ethos. So therefore, most contracts, as Matthew did allude to, don't have the word collaboration anywhere in the contract. And if I'd have asked, before Matthew had said that statement, I reckon if I'd have asked where does collaboration appear, more than one person would have shouted out clause 10.1 or 10.2, because they think it's there, but actually it's not. So 10.1, which is now split into 10.1 and 10.2 with NEC4, talks about working in a spirit of mutual trust and cooperation, which doesn't actually mean working outside the rules of the contract, and nor should collaboration mean working outside the rules of the contract. So we're going to be considering collaboration during the day, and maybe we can come up with our own definition as a group as the conclusion of our conference together today. Thinking about what I was going to talk about this year, which I don't force, but I thought I did have a useful topic on just reflecting on some of the main things that have happened within the year related, obviously, to NEC. And first of all, let's remind ourselves where this comes from, and it comes from our LinkedIn group. So we set this group up about 8.5 years ago, and the NEC people managing NEC3 and NEC4 contracts, and it's swelled now to 6,828 people within the community. So a massive, thriving community. And even in the last year, we've had another 500 people. There were some people saying, oh, well, we've reached our critical mass a couple of years ago, and then you'll only get a few more. But we continue to have ever number of people joining. So we're well over the 6,800 now, and by far the biggest NEC discussion forum in the industry. Other discussion groups are available, I believe, but we're probably twice the size of the next one. And we don't let anyone in, well, apart from some of you lot, but we do have a little bit of a constraint, and in particular, recruiters. No offence to the couple that are here today, but we do keep those out because they're generally not in there to enhance their NEC knowledge, but to tap you guys up. So we have kept it as a real working group, and it's very much around sort of senior managers, and this conference is a senior managers conference. So there's some pretty very experienced people in the room, very learned people, and yet they're taking the time out today because they see the value of this session. So we're pretty proud of the group and what it does. So just a reminder about the group, it's there to share good practice. So if you're not in the group, well, first of all, how are you here today? Leave immediately. But if you're not, maybe join at the first break. It's also there to canvass opinion on contractual matters, challenge our understanding of individual clauses, and in a very constructive environment. So I'm pretty sure any of you would feel free to ask a question in there and know you're going to get a very constructive argument. So use it. So it's a really powerful group for debating various aspects of the contract. Also this year, we've been very pleased to get involved with a project, and it's called Bridges to Prosperity. And it's a joint venture with Balfour Beatty and Mott MacDonald, and they are currently, as we speak, over in Rwanda, building the very first bridge to prosperity. So there's a number of bridges planned over the coming months and years, and I'm sure you're well aware of what's been going on in Rwanda, the civil unrest and the commotion that's caused in that country, pretty devastating, and people are left stranded with all of the sort of issues there, and people having to travel 2-3 hours just to be able to cross over to get to healthcare facilities or schools. So we've actually, as a group, we've become involved with this to help sponsor it as well. And if I just come out of here, just going to show you a short video clip about what they're doing.
Right now, in the Serengeti and NEC4 communities of southern Rwanda, over 4,000 people do not have safe access to critical infrastructure across the impassable Mwogo River. The river floods 330 days of the year, cutting people off from critical resources such as healthcare, schools, markets and farms. With swimming as their only option to cross, some students take an extra hour-and-a-half journey to a distant passing to attend school, and access to the nearest health clinic is over 2.5 hours away.
Bridges to Prosperity works with local communities, partners and foundations to build durable and environmentally sustainable footbridges. The bridges connect people with safe, year-round access to critical infrastructure, empowering communities out of poverty through education, healthcare and improved economic productivity.
What our team are going to do in June 2019, that is Mott MacDonald and Balfour Beatty, will be working in collaboration with Bridges to Prosperity in Rwanda to build a 92-metre long bridge that will provide this safe passage for the Serengeti and NEC4 communities for years to come.
The Bridges to Prosperity programme will allow the community on either side of the bridge to link with each other. It will give opportunity for young people to access education, for everyone, mothers, children, parents to get better access to healthcare, as well as provide opportunities for agriculture and other economic benefits that by linking to communities would only be natural then to happen.
If you'd like to support us in bringing safe access to thousands of people in the Serengeti and NEC4 communities, you can donate using the link below. But if you would like to purchase funds for equipment, you can email us using the details below. Thank you.
Okay, so pretty impressive project, and one we've been really pleased to get involved with. And Simon Fraser, who was the old-looking bloke you saw in that video, he's actually presented this conference before. Over the years, he has dreamt up the odd excuse of why he wasn't here. We'll give him this one. So he did email me this morning. He had a time-lapse video, but I couldn't quite get it to load up. But so he's out in Rwanda as we speak. So as group sponsors, we've actually diverted £1,000 of our budget this year to the project. And Richard Patterson, who's here from Mott MacDonald, stand up, Richard. So he's got his annual conference tie on today. So Richard there's a bit of information there, so you can chat to Richard. If you want to get involved as an individual or as a company, then it's possible to donate to that really excellent project. In the year, so Fast Draft, which we launched this time last year. So the Fast Draft, our new online administration tool for managing the flow of contract management systems, so NEC communication tool. In the last year, it's really grown in its use. We've got a number of new clients now using the system. And certainly this afternoon, we're doing a breakout group on the cloud-based systems generally, looking at, well, what do you want to get out of these in the future? So looking really at the sort of next generation of what these can do for you. So we'll brainstorm them together and see, well, let's try and get these into future systems. In terms of Reachback, this is our question and answer portal. So hopefully a number of you are involved with this or would use this facility. Again, if not, well, use it because it's a fantastic commodity. And just last week, we clocked up our 3,000th question. No prizes for that, but 3,000 questions specifically on NEC contracts. Just clocked up last week. And Reachback there, I just took our top 6. So these are our top 6 panel members in terms of sort of number of questions they've asked over the years, answered rather. Just stand up if you're a panel member. I haven't seen everyone. Just stand up if you're on that panel. Okay, so you've got 5. Yes, I thought 2 here, Andrew. So other than Barry, you couldn't make it today. Thank you. So we are your panel members. There's others as well. They're just the top 6 who are answering your questions. And there's been 600 questions answered just in the last year on the platform. So a big thank you to fellow panel members. If you're interested in joining our panel, speak to Chris Core on the Built Intelligence stand. We're always looking for experts. And there are lots of experts in the room. If you think you're not, you are. So it's really good to get involved and give other people advice on sort of managing aspects of NEC. So it is basically a free consultancy from recognised industry experts. So use it. It is also a good teaching aid. I've heard of a few individuals who said, when I'm bored, I load up one of the questions and I read it and then I try and answer it myself and then see if I agree with the expert. To which I respond, sado. But I actually think it's a really good. It's another good way of sort of learning how we can get the best out of these contracts. So I think that's great that people are using it in that vein. And it is available as well as the web version. We've got an app, so you can download the app. And before the QS is asked, we did think about charging 99p, but we knew you wouldn't download it. So it is a free app, so you can download that. So all of those 3,000 questions will be on your handheld devices. And there's a really good search engine within the platform, so you can really explore all the archive questions. So if you've got a question, almost certainly there'll be 4 or 5 questions already answered around that. Now, I could regret this, but I thought, right, let's test it. Now, this might be a bad move. Let me just see. So I've gone into Reachback. Someone give me, I was going to say obscure, but that's probably wrong for some of you in the audience to really test that. But someone give me a subtle point around the contract, and we'll see if we get any advice. Someone just shout out something. Something. Just an aspect of the contract. Just what might someone want to know about? Scheduler cost components. Okay. Okay, so we're in there now. So scheduler cost components. So if I've searched that, then it will come up with specific elements. If you wanted to know about, if we put in van. So that's always a common question. Do I get paid for vans? So tyre puncture repair included in defined costs. There you go. So we can go into that one. And Andrew, so you've answered this one, and John as well. So prompted a little bit. So tyre puncture repair kit. Well, it's different from toilet rolls, which is normally the question that gets asked in these systems. But that's the whole idea, that you can very much make the use of these particular systems. Right, so let me get back into presentation. So really what I wanted to now go into was aspects around NEC4. So as you're well aware, NEC4 was launched 22nd of June 2017. So literally it's 2 years old within a couple of days. And a question for you guys is, what have you seen? Has there been much take-up in the industry in the first 2 years? Because I know my experience. Just raise your hand if you've been involved with an NEC4 contract in any way. Just raise your hand. Okay, thank you. So that's probably just over half, which I'm actually encouraged, because I was actually thinking maybe it wouldn't have been quite that much, because clients are creatures of habit and they're engaged under current contracts and sometimes a little bit slow to switch over. But that is encouraging. And those who haven't put your hands up, this time next year, everyone will be raising their hands, because it makes no sense not to. You've got a better system, so why would you not use the latest version? Now, what you might not be aware of is there's been some amendments of NEC4, which were, well, they're called the January 2019 amendments, although they didn't come out until March, but we're forgiven for that. So there's some new amendments titled the January 2019 amendments. They are available on my website, the GMH Planning website. If you can't find them anywhere else, you could download them from there. Most of the elements are just typos or very minor changes. Things like change right to any rights, change rights to rights, and delete notification and substitute the provision. It's things like that. So fairly small beer stuff that they've changed, typos. Even on LinkedIn yesterday, someone else had picked up on some words were italicized, and Rob Gerrard saying, yeah, okay, they shouldn't be, or vice versa. So there's a few little bits that over time will just be amended. But most of these amendments are fairly small things, not too much to worry about. You don't need to buy new contracts. You can just have these amendments and then just read them alongside them. But if you do buy new contracts, then you'll have the January 2019 version. However, there is one significant amendment within the 2019 amendments, and I wanted to share my personal journey, if that doesn't sound too naff, of this clause amendment over the past 8 years. And this is all to do with clause 63.3, if you're an NEC3 person, or clause 63.5, if you're an NEC4 person. Now, most people, or lots of people, will know that 63.3 is the clause that says a delay to the completion date is assessed as the length of time that due to the compensation event, planned completion is later than planned completion as shown on the accepted programme. Now, it's one of the longer clauses, has to be said, but it works, it's fine, and it's certainly coming close to the 40-word limit, and it then repeats itself for key dates as well. So it repeats the same thing. So that clause is emphasising, first of all, that planned completion is your most important milestone. When I do training, I ask people, what's the most important milestone, planned completion or completion date? Normally at the beginning of the training session, they would tend to say completion date. By the end of the session, they're all saying, actually, it's planned, isn't it? But it's like, yeah, I agree. Planned completion is the key measure. It's also the clause that emphasises total float is owned, well, if we're talking ECC, by the contractor. So the gap between planned completion and completion date is called terminal float, and that is owned by the contractor under the ECC, subcontractor under the ECS, etc. But that clause is good, but I wrote this article back in 2013. It went into the NEC Newsgood newsletter, and it was a clause saying, well, an article saying, what contract program do you use when you're assessing a compensation event? Well, the answer to that is, well, the last accepted program. What's wrong with that? Well, what if that last accepted program was 4 months old? I mean, as if anyone's got a program older than a month old in this room. Raise your hand if you've got a program not accepted in the last 4 weeks. No one. Oh, one. What's wrong with you, Matthew? A few of you. And if you have gone 1, 2, 3, 4 months, then okay, that it happens. It shouldn't, but it does happen. And then if you've got 1 or 2 compensation events, 1 or 200 compensation events happen in that period, well, then how are you going to assess them against the last accepted program? What's the rules? And when I wrote that article, I spoke to a few of you in this room as well, kind of got your feedback on it, because it was quite a hard article to write. I just wanted to know what the answer was. And just about, I found enough clauses in NEC3 that proved you've got to take into account progress and other compensation events since the last accepted program. But it shouldn't be a battle, and it should have been fairly clear. And the conclusion of the article, I wrote, when NEC4 comes out, they've got to adjust this so the industry knows what they should be doing. And that was the conclusion of the article. But in the meantime, these are the clauses that help you with those rules. 2017, fast forward 4 years, and NEC4 was launched. And the red is the new bits. Now, first of all, they added current at the dividing date to the first part of the delay to completion date, etc. Now, that's okay. That's quite helpful. So what that does is give the switch point a name. It's called the dividing date. So the boundary between actual and forecast cost is the dividing date, and you use the program current at the dividing date. So that's very sensible, very useful, and it repeats it for the key dates. Then you get these other words, the third paragraph, which I have no idea what that means. And more importantly, no one from NEC seemed to be able to tell me what that meant either, which was a bit frustrating. And I think it was just kind of added in as a little bit of a rush at the end. We need to do something. But unfortunately, although NEC4 generally was very good, this one aspect wasn't very helpful because I had no idea what it meant and I wanted to know. And if I didn't know, then I think a lot of other people wouldn't have known. So this came out on the 22nd of June 2017, which prompted me to write an article and publish it on the 23rd of June 2017, and it was titled The NEC4 Elephant in the Room. Now, what I did first of all was to say, congratulations to the NEC4, great contract, very good contributions, some good additions, very much promoting evolution rather than revolution. So there's subtle changes rather than rewrite what you know and start again. And I did. It was good to see that lots of the initiatives that NEC4 has brought in has come about from discussions we've had in these these seminars. So a number of our experts in this room, twice we've given NEC a list of what we wanted to see as a group, and many of the changes we've recommended have made NEC4. So I was very positive in the beginning bit of the article, but then I went on to say, but you've missed this elephant in the room, this one big issue you've not addressed. And apparently the authors of the contract weren't very happy with me publishing this article the day after their contracts were launched. And in particular, they weren't so happy with the photo that I included within the article, which I thought was meant to lighten the load, but it didn't go down. It didn't go down so well. But it was just trying to address, look, there is this issue, and all I want is the answer to it, and what are we going to do? What do these new words mean? We need to help the industry. Now, whilst the article didn't go down so well, it did prompt a bit of a discussion, an internal discussion, and at least one of the people from this panel, a working group, is in the room today, and they worked on this, which came out in October, and it was practice note number 1. So this was the first time they'd issued a mini guidance document. It's a page and a half long. Again, you can download it from my website if you can't find it on the NEC website. And basically, the conclusion of this guidance is summarising that when you're using the last accepted programme, you should first recognise the impact of alterations to the accepted programme resulting from other compensation events, and also progress that happened prior to the dividing date, which was great. That's all I wanted as advice to the industry, assuming that was the answer, and I think that is the right answer. But the trouble was that was then in guidance notes. And people are very quick when it suits them to say, guidance isn't part of the contract. So it wasn't best placed in the guidance notes, although it was certainly better than nothing. And then finally, January 2019, that we've read in March, now says, delete that third paragraph and replace with the following more sensible words. It doesn't say that. That was my words. And it says the assessment takes into account any delay caused by the compensation event already in the accepted programme and events which have happened between the date of the accepted programme and the dividing date. So that is your new NEC4 contract, finally clarifying what makes sense, because that's the only way I think you can assess delays. So yes, we take the last accepted programme, but we first bring it up to date with progress and other compensation events, see where you were. Then you impact the CE, the compensation event, and see, okay, what impact that then has. So in summary, we take the last accepted program at the dividing date, bring it up to date with progress, major logic changes, and the effects of other compensation events already notified, rebaseline that to then capture the effects of plan completion. If anyone's in project controls, you start hyperventilating now. Rebaseline, we can't do that. But you've got to, within the world of NEC, you can have separate baselines for your EVA and things like that you need to do. That's no problem. Now we feed in the new compensation event and see, once you've rescheduled it, if that has any effect on any of the plan completion milestones, i.e. plan completion or a key date or a sectional. And that will then be the true effect of the entitlement. And once implemented, you can then move completion date by that amount. Now, this amendment, whilst it's written for NEC4, I believe that is equally applicable to NEC3 because it's clarification of the old rule rather than a brand new rule. And I do have to admit that won't be without its problems because the contractor's going to have to prove what the state of play was since the last accepted program before you can then impact the compensation event. So there's two programs almost to have a look at there. And there might be the potential for some games to be played by contractors if we're talking about ECC, to try and show a different picture before the compensation event was assessed. But then again, like any compensation event, the project manager gets to assess themselves if they don't agree that that assessment has been carried out in accordance with the contract. So they could then make their own assessment. So I think overall that's a much fairer rule, and indeed the only way either party can expect a fair and true assessment. While we're at it, other NEC4 program amendments. So 32.1 is the revised program requirements. So as well as that big list in 31.2, you've got extra over requirements in clause 32.1 that says these are what also has to be on a revised program. So there's 4 bullet points in NEC3, but they've deleted one with NEC4. So it's taken out the line of implemented compensation events. Now they've done that to try and emphasise that you don't only show implemented compensation events, you show non-implemented as well, because that's a common question. Do we show non-implemented compensation events on the program? The answer has to be Yes, look at the first line. So if you've already got something that is impacting your works, then you need to be showing that on the programme. Now, as recently as last month, I have a major client in London. Now, I won't say who they are, but they don't work above ground, okay? And they have told one of my contractors that they cannot show non-implemented compensation events on the programme issued for acceptance. So how can that possibly be? So for the avoidance of doubt, I feel like a lawyer about to write a Z clause, but except a lawyer would now write something completely contrary to what the contract says. So I won't do that. So for the avoidance of doubt in this situation, the contractor has to show the effects of non-implemented compensation events on the programme, but only showing their effects on plan completion. So the intent was always there that, of course, you have to show non-implemented compensation events. They're already impacting the works, but you only move plan completion. And indeed, that line that says implemented compensation events, that only ever meant if you've had an implemented CE and the project manager's agreed, there is a week movement, you can now move completion date by 1 week. That line was all that ever meant, and it still works. So it doesn't need to be there, which is why they've deleted the clause. 31.3 is the 4 reasons not to accept a programme, which you'll know, the plans which are not practicable, it doesn't show the information the contract requires, it doesn't represent the contractor's plans realistically, or doesn't comply with the works information. Again, I've used the ECC in these examples, but I could run the same for the PSC or the ECS as well. Clients in the room, can I point out, it does not say, I don't like the end date. Can everyone see that? It doesn't say that. So that is not a reason to reject the programme. Project manager has up to 2 weeks in which to accept or not accept the programme, and you're well aware there is no instant deemed acceptance if there's no response. In NEC4, we only have deemed acceptances to do with compensation events, not for programme. So with NEC3, the remedy, if there was no response, was to notify a compensation event. In training, people say, well, we notify an early warning. Well, if they've ignored your programme, they'll ignore the early warning. So I would always say notify a compensation event. Under 60.1 bracket 6, non-response to a communication within the timescale is a compensation event. You might say, what's the point? I'll come back to that point in a second. NEC4, however, has a much clearer remedy. So in red, NEC4 says, if you don't respond to a programme within 2 weeks, the contractor now notifies the lack of response of the project manager, and within a week of that then going in and not being responded to, that then becomes deemed accepted. So we do have a deemed acceptance of the programme with NEC4. Now, I don't think that's going to lead to a whole load of deemed acceptances. What I think it will do is force a response from the project manager on the client side, and that response may well be rejection. But then we'll see later they've beefed up the 13.4, which says if you are rejecting, you've got to state the reasons why in enough detail that allows the contractor to correct the submission. So I don't think that will change too much. I just think it will force a response, and that's what I want from the industry. So from the project manager, they will have to be responding. Going back to this point, you might say, well, what's the point in notifying a compensation event? Because it's not like design. If design isn't responded to, that is a whole point. So there will be a tangible cost you can ascertain by being held up. But the programme, you might say, well, what's the point? Well, this actually came just a few weeks ago. This actually played out, and I thought I'd share it with you today. It was quite interesting. So this is one of my clients, so Sean, he sent me an email. Notice the time, 8:44 on Tuesday, April the 30th. The time's quite significant. And he sent me an email to say that programme went in on the 5th of April, and a response was due by the 19th of April, 2 weeks later. However, despite email and communications, no response received by the 30th of April, and now the response is nearly 2 weeks overdue. Where does this leave us? As the programme has key dates which have changed, and in order to procure, acceptance is required. Not been in this situation where the client's not responded. According to NEC3 option A, where do I stand? Is my clause 32 accepted by default, or does an early warning get produced indicating that the non-acceptance or feedback will now affect procurement? Now, I traditionally do training 5 days a week, and I normally start at 9 o'clock, and that was no different that day. So I didn't have long, but at 8:52 that morning, I did respond and said, Sean, a few key points that Neil was doing a training session with these guys as well, said Neil's going to run through it with you on the training, but as a heads up, number one, the key mechanism to move a key date or a completion date is not moving it on a programme and getting the programme accepted. You have to go through the compensation process to get them moved, and then you can move them on the programme. Second point, there is no deemed acceptance of a programme. However, you can notify lack of response under 60.1 bracket 6, which, whilst you can't claim any money for, should get their attention. They have to respond with either acceptance or non-acceptance and explain in detail why. About to start training now, but could go into more detail later on. So that was 8:52. I started my training session. At the first break, I was busy. So at lunchtime, having a couple of sandwiches and logged on again. And there was a response from Sean at 1:05. So at lunchtime, 1:05, there was a response. And Sean's response was, Glenn, many thanks for the email. The clause 60.16 prompt caused an immediate reaction and the program got accepted 30 minutes later. My response, system works, smiley face. So I'm not saying that will work every time, but isn't it great just to see that that is actually how it panned out? So by notifying that compensation event, it got their attention and they got to a situation where, yes, they got their program accepted. And the last topic I wanted to reflect on is good old Z clauses. So I'm sure you're aware Z clauses are changes from the standard form. And most projects will have Z clauses. I'm not anti-Z clauses. I'm just anti-rubbish ones, or ones that really unbalance the sort of spirit of the contract. And it's been a common theme. And then no doubt it'll come up today. No doubt in a question time panel there'll be something around Z clauses that normally is. What I have seen with a few different contractors now over the past few months is subcontractors introducing additional Z clauses down the line to their supply chain. Now, you'd expect them to pass the same Z clauses that they've signed up to with their clients down the line to their subcontractors. That same rubbish they've signed up to, they then pass along the line to their supply chain. However, I've seen an increase in contractors with a whole multitude of additional Z clauses they, as a matter of course, pass down the line to their subcontractors. And I was quite shocked. I don't know if that's like being naive, but I was genuinely quite shocked. Well, why are we doing that? Because why would you want to add additional risk to the subcontractor that they will then price for, assuming they've read it? So now you're going to pay more money that you wouldn't actually need to because it's covering things it doesn't need to. And if you've done it so that they don't spot the implications, well, then what behaviours is that going to encourage? So if they've signed up to risk they didn't know and now they're struggling, well, that's going to encourage the wrong behaviours. They're going to be trying to grab money elsewhere, which, all right, they've got to use the systems, but very difficult to do. In my experience, the contracts operational teams are actually quite embarrassed by having to follow them, but they're being told from high up above that they've got to. So I think we definitely need to try and educate legal teams or other departments, procurement, who are imposing them, that they actually think that is a good idea. And what I do find increasingly, and I do this a lot for my clients, I review Z clauses, particularly where a contractor's at tender stage or a subcontractor's at tender stage, and I comment on the Z clauses. Now, most of them I won't comment on because most of them don't do any harm, but the ones that do, I point out, right, this is an issue, you need to decide what you're going to do with it. Are you going to price the risk? Are you going to try and get it overturned? Or are you going to walk away? And what I do see increasingly is that when I've suggested, look, these are Z clauses you need to be aware of, when they've then challenged their client, so in this case, a subcontractor challenging the contractor, very often the contractor says, oh, all right, then we'll take it back out. Now, if you're a contractor who's saying, well, we'll try it, and if they challenge it, we'll take it out, that should not be there. I'm quite passionate about that. We shouldn't be trying to sneak in a clause that then if they challenge it, oh, well, we tried, we're going to take it out. So I think that's just food for thought for this audience, and maybe we could debate it in the group more about, the moralness of that, the contractual elements of that. Is that something we should be doing? Because I'm really convinced it isn't. So I think that's something we need to discuss as a group. Which takes me to the infamous part of my presentation each year, which is Z Clause of the Year Award 2019. Now, I have damped this down this year because I've been aware of several clients coming to this session looking for inspiration. This is not what this segment is encouraged to be. So I've just picked out a few, okay? So just a few that we're going to run through. Now, the first one you might have seen on social media. I actually like this. See what you make of it. So clause 10.4, so anything read is an amendment in these slides. They've said the contractor is to provide the employer the following, and I'll let you read this one. Why? I think this is a good clause. Why did this client do this? Just shout out. Exactly, just to see if you've actually read the contract. And there was one contractor who came back, clearly had read it, because they said, With regards to your clause 10.4, could you clarify if the meeting starts in the morning, rolls on to the afternoon, does that mean we need to provide both sets of sandwiches? And do we provide one sandwich cut up very small, or would you like a certain number? Are there any vegans? And so it went on. But that's it. It was just there to say, have you read the contract? So I quite like that one. Right, let's look on to some other ones which I didn't like. So 61.3 is the clause that says, now this was a ECC one, so this is the clause that says, contractor, you notify a compensation event, and if you don't notify it within 8 weeks, and it's one you're duty bound to notify, then you become time barred. So that clause, I'm okay with. I think that's very fair. We know, if you remember, at EC2 to 3 went from 2 weeks to 8 weeks, because the legal fraternity was saying that's not legally enforceable. And okay, so what is? And eventually it was settled on 8 weeks. So 2 weeks not legally enforceable, 8 weeks definitely, maybe somewhere in between possibly, but 8 weeks. And yeah, okay, get that, it's a long time. But if it needs to be legally enforceable, that was the boundary. Except there was an amendment to say when you're notifying compensation events, you have to include time and cost implications. Well, hang on, this is the notification, so that shouldn't come into it. Is it or isn't it a CE? That comes in the quotation phase. So that's the first part. That wouldn't be a winner on its own. But then it went on to say that amended clauses, it said, have to be notified within 24 hours, otherwise they are time barred. So, very bold statement. Now, I'm not sure legally enforceable. I strongly suspect not. But nevertheless, who's advising these people to actually put this clause in here? So, there's one. 61.4 is the clause whereby the project manager, if the contractor notifies a compensation event, the project manager responds, either yes or no. If they don't respond, the contractor can notify them of their lack of response, and then 2 weeks later, it will be deemed accepted. So we're all familiar with that one. This particular contract, they deleted the last sentence, deemed acceptance, and replaced with the project manager shall use reasonable endeavours to reply within 4 weeks of this notification. So again, just no real, well, what happens if they don't then? So reasonable endeavours. Fantastic. Now, this one isn't a Z clause, but it's a KPI. Now, it's a major airport in the UK. That's all I'm going to say on that one. And what they've introduced is a specific KPI that the only way this KPI could be achieved was if you didn't follow the rules of the contract. So what I think they were meaning there was, well, yeah, when we say we work in the spirit of mutual trust and cooperation, they think that means when we don't want you to follow the actual rules of the contract. So that one wasn't really not encouraging the right behaviours. So to achieve that KPI, you had to not follow the contract, like follow verbal instructions and things like that, which we all know we shouldn't be doing. So that was a very problematic clause. Neil said me this one very briefly. So the contractor doesn't start work until the project manager issues an appropriate notice to proceed. So it's capitalised. So they've introduced that as a defined term. And then insert the following defined term. So they've defined it. Very good. Notice to proceed means a notice to start work issued or to be issued by the project manager in accordance with clause 30.1, permitting the contractor to commence work. Might not seem that dangerous on first glance. However, 1, there was no triggering event for the issue of the notice to proceed and no requirement to show anything related to the NTP on the programme, and no compensation event linked to delayed issue of the notice to proceed. So they could then notice at any time, and there wasn't actually any remedy, recourse for the contractor. So that was quite a subtle one. I don't know if they meant that deliberately, but I don't know if they were that clever, to be honest. But nevertheless, not a very helpful clause. This is the one I mentioned earlier. So 13.4 has been beefed up in NEC4, and rightly so. So any reply to communication, if it's non-acceptance, you've got to state the reasons why, and then NEC4 adds insufficient detail to allow the contractor to correct the matter. This was amended. The contractor may withhold acceptance of a submission by the subcontractor where the subcontract states that the contractor may give or refuse to give an acceptance at the contractor's absolute discretion. The contractor's refusal to give an acceptance for this reason is deemed to be a reason stated in the contract. Okay, we're not meant to laugh at these. Can we keep these serious, please? Don't encourage them. So some simple rules. When we are creating Z clauses, follow the rules the author of the contract actually put in place. So avoid subjective phrases, limit the word count. You might remember the 2018 winner was a clause that was 183 words long. And to this day, I still don't know what that clause meant. Avoid cross-referencing other clauses. So each clause is intended to be standalone. Write it for a specific reason and purpose, and don't just use Z clauses to paper over the cracks. For example, I often see changes to liability clauses or ambiguities. So if a client's not confident their works information is any good, they change the ambiguity clause that says, well, that becomes your problem. So if any errors in our documents, doesn't become most favourable to the one who didn't create it, it becomes least favourable to the one who didn't create it, which is then basically making all of those issues the contractor's problem. So just coming to the conclusion now of my presentation, and I had to award a winner. Except this year, I couldn't award a winner. It was a joint winner because there was two equally bad, and see what you make of them. And one of the authors of this, not the authors, but this might be someone in this room, their clause, but I won't make any eye contact. It's an amendment to clause, I'm going to read this one out. Now, this one's all right. So 27.5 says, subject to clause 27.6, if the contractor purports, well, there you go. If you didn't know it was a Z clause, you do now. Purports, anyone? Purports to give any instruction to the subcontractor or their authorised representative otherwise than in writing, it is of no immediate effect and the subcontractor asks the contractor to provide a written confirmation instead. Subject to clause 27.6, any instruction provided by the contractor to the subcontractor pursuant to this clause, I'm getting out of breath, 27.5 only takes effect as from the date of the contractor's written confirmation of that instruction. Actually, that's all right. I like that. That's almost, well, you don't really need it, but it's confirming what the contract says. So until it's in writing, but it does say subject to clause 27.6. Should we have a look at that? Okay, 27.6 says, and I'll let you read the first point. Richard, did you clap? And the second one goes on, where instructions are issued by the contractor under this clause 27.6, the contractor shall provide written confirmation of that instruction as soon as practicable. Oh, well, that's all right then. So as soon as practicable. And again, you'll have your own definition of that. So quite incredible, that one. And the joint winner, I couldn't leave that alone. The joint winner, almost like ironic, this one. Clause 31.3, we've already seen. We've got our 4 reasons for not accepting. So not practical, doesn't show the information the contract requires, doesn't represent the contractor's plans realistically, or doesn't comply with the works information. And the joint Z clause of the year winner added one more reason, and it's this. So I think the technical term is, I think we're screwed there, aren't we? Because you're not allowed to change the program, but if you don't change it, it's not realistic. So good luck. Now, what I will say is the last 3 years winners, so 2018, 17, 16, two of those 3 winners since the conference within 2 months amended their Z clause. We can only hope. Okay. So I say this every year, let's hope for less nominations. It doesn't ever happen, but hopefully next year maybe. So I've got about 7 minutes left. Any questions from anything I've covered? And we have Christopher is the roving mic man today. Any questions on anything that I've covered in my session? Anyone?
Hi, Glenn. Have you seen any changes in how clients are accepting programs over the last few years, or is it still the sort of same level of non-acceptance?
I think it's better, but still, well, we've heard, a major client in London there giving completely wrong advice, which is almost Janitor John School of NEC. That's pretty basic. So I think there are improvements. I think there's a lot more. I do a lot more sort of joint workshops with client and contractor and trying to get those processes working right from the outset. So, and I see lots of projects where, they are recognising the importance. I think contractors have stepped up, so their quality of programs is better. They're doing things like having review meetings to try and get it across the line. Clients are becoming aware through forums like this, I think, that actually it's in their interest to have an accepted program, because why do you not want an accepted program? How are you going to assess change, compensation events, if you haven't had an accepted program? And clients want to understand what their budget, the liability is. So I think it has improved, but if we're there and there, it's like we're still only here, and there's definitely room for improvement. And I think this is where I want sort of this audience to be going out there, kind of spreading the word. As a planner, as I used to be, I was quite happy to have a rejected program as long as you told me what was wrong with it, and within 24 hours I put it back in, I come and sit with you, try and make sure then we get that accepted. So there is an improvement, but still still not quick enough, and we still need more. Okay. Any other questions? Any other experiences, Z clauses anyone wants to share? Okay, Richard at the middle.
Glenn, it's just a simple problem we seem to have on a few highways jobs. We get a lot of change, and I mean 70, 80 compensation events a month. Now, heading to NEC4, when you say events have to be updated, events is progress. So in theory, we're going to have to update our programme daily, impact change, then more progress and everything else. I think there could be a problem here actually with the resource issues, actually being able to do it, because we physically won't be able to actually achieve that amount of change that we can get, and how do we actually manage that through? It's going to be a very difficult problem.
Okay, Richard, I don't think you can leave site at 3 o'clock anymore. You're going to have to stay there a bit longer, and yeah, it's a real life it's a real life situation. But then again, whether we've got 70, 80 compensation events, the very nature of our industry is things change. So we've got to be updating the programs, whether it's our own change in logic or situations have arisen. So it's always the case. We're going to have to update our programs every period. And the key there will be, look, we're not saying that, every of those 70, 80 has to be analysed. You'll be aware, obviously, if we submit a revised program every 4 weeks, what we're going to be looking is the cumulative effect of everything that's happened this month is this. And if plan completion has moved by 2 weeks, then in terms of time, we just want to focus on, well, which events cause that 2-week delay? And it may be, let's say it's 2 events. Out of those 70, there's 2 events that cause the critical delay, and everything else is just cost. I'll say just. But that'll be for the QSs to worry about in terms of catching up. Yep, they've got a bit of work to do. But at least you can focus on the time elements of those 2 events that has caused the problem.
I disagree with that slightly, because anything which is not critical is eating up float. If it's eating up float, it's going to the risk profile of the programme.
Yeah.
And therefore you might actually be changing significantly your programme without realising it or taking things on board you shouldn't do.
Yeah, absolutely. So we can keep an eye on float reduction, and there's various tools you can do that. So we're not going to ignore it. Absolutely agree. But at least we can focus on what the time elements we're going to capture within the individual compensation in quotes. And then, yes, float erosion will be consideration. We all know total float is shared between the parties. The client is allowed to utilise it as well as the contractor. There will be a point where, hang on, we've used up so much now that, hang on, even that, we've only got 3 days float left now. And that is some kind of cost we can equate as risk. It's hard to do. That will always be subjective. I think the other issue as well, we've got lots of, big projects with multiple change. The rules are the same for those big projects. So no one's saying it's going to be easy, but hey, that keeps some of us employed. It's going to be difficult to keep on top of. But I always say to people, it's not impossible. And what's more important is, okay then, if we accept that's difficult, all right then, what's the alternative? And there's your problem. Because the alternative is, well, let's leave it all to the end and let's have a bun fight at the end. Hey, we've got JCT contracts if we want to do that. But under NEC, we want to be doing things as we go and understand the liability. So it will continue to be a problem. That's no easy thing. One last question? Okay, well, thank you for listening. I'm going to pass over now to our second presentation of the day.